The German shepherd exploded forward with a sound I'd never heard him make before. Not a bark, not a whine, a scream. Guttural, desperate, absolutely frantic, as Ranger lunged toward the tiny white coffin with every ounce of his 85 pounds. His claws scraped across the polished funeral home floor, his body twisted mid-air, and for the first time in 6 years of service, he disobeyed a direct command. "Ranger, heel!" Officer Mitchell's voice cracked through the chapel. 200 mourners gasped in unison. But Ranger didn't care about commands anymore. He didn't care about discipline or training or the shocked faces of everyone gathered to say goodbye to 7-year-old Emily Carter, because Emily wasn't dead. Pause. And somehow, this dog knew it. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up 30 seconds to the moment before everything we thought we knew shattered into 1,000 impossible pieces. The funeral had been somber, painfully quiet. Sarah Carter sat in the front row, her body folded in on itself like a paper crane crushed by a careless hand, and her husband Daniel had one arm wrapped around her shoulders while his other hand covered his mouth. Trying to hold in sounds that wanted to escape. Trying to hold anything together. Their daughter's coffin, so small it made your chest hurt just looking at it, rested on a pedestal surrounded by white roses and teddy bears and crayon drawings from her classmates. "We'll miss you, Emily," and "Heaven got an angel," and all those things people say when they don't know what else to do with grief. The story everyone knew. Tragic accident. Emily had fallen down the stairs at home, hit her head. The autopsy said massive internal trauma, and by the time her mother found her, it was already too late. 7 years old. Gone. Maple Ridge hadn't seen tragedy like this in decades. Officer Mitchell stood near the back with Ranger, a gesture of respect, since Emily had loved that dog. She'd met him at a community safety fair 2 years ago, and from that moment on, every time she saw Ranger, her whole face would light up. She'd squeal his name, throw her arms around his neck, and Ranger would go completely still in that way trained canines do. But his tail would wag, just slightly, just for her. So Mitchell brought him to the funeral, to say goodbye. Except Ranger wasn't saying goodbye. If you think Ranger deserves a medal, hit that like button right now. This dog literally saved a life. His entire body had gone rigid the moment they wheeled the coffin into position, his ears pinned forward, his nose working the air in sharp, rapid inhales. And then, the lunge. Mitchell's command meant nothing. The leash meant nothing. Ranger hit the end of it so hard he nearly pulled Mitchell off his feet, and the sound he made, God, the sound, it was the kind of noise that bypasses your brain and goes straight to your spine. Pure panic. Pure urgency. "Mitchell, control your dog," someone hissed. But Mitchell wasn't looking at the crowd. He was staring at Ranger, and his face had gone pale, because he recognized that posture, that sound, that behavior. It was the exact response Ranger gave when he found a living person during a search and rescue. Not a body, a survivor. "Something's wrong," Mitchell said quietly. Then louder. "Something's wrong!" Sarah Carter's head snapped up, her red-rimmed eyes wide and confused. Daniel started to stand. The funeral director hurried forward, hands raised to calm the situation. But Officer Daniels, Mitchell's partner standing near the side door, wasn't watching the coffin. He was watching a man at the back of the chapel, a man who'd been standing too still, too focused, and who was now backing slowly toward the exit, his face slick with sweat despite the cool air. Their eyes met for half a second, and the man ran. "Stop!" Daniels shouted, but the man was already slamming through the chapel doors into the October afternoon, and Ranger tore the leash clean out of Mitchell's grip and bolted after him, still making that terrible, desperate sound. The funeral erupted into chaos. But Mitchell was already moving toward the coffin, his radio in his hand, his voice sharp and commanding. "Dispatch, this is Mitchell. We have a possible 1078 at Riverside Funeral Home, requesting immediate EMS and backup. We need—" He stopped mid-sentence, because he'd reached the coffin. And up close, he could see what Ranger had somehow sensed from 20 feet away. The white satin lining rising and falling. Barely. But rising. "She's breathing," Mitchell whispered. Then he screamed it. "She's breathing! Someone get a paramedic! Now!" Sarah Carter's scream cut through the chapel like broken glass. She was on her feet, stumbling forward, Daniel right behind her, and the funeral director was stammering something about protocol and procedure. But Mitchell had already ripped open the coffin lid with his bare hands, and Emily, pale as porcelain, lips faintly blue, her small chest rising and falling in shallow, almost imperceptible breaths, her eyes closed, dressed in her favorite yellow dress with the sunflowers, her hair carefully brushed, her hands folded across her chest exactly the way a funeral home arranges someone who's supposed to be dead. Except she wasn't. "Emily!" Sarah's voice cracked as she reached for her daughter, but Mitchell caught her wrist. "Don't move her. Let the paramedics—" "That's my daughter." "I know, ma'am, I know. But we need professionals. We need—" Two paramedics burst through the side door, drawn by the commotion, their faces shifting from confusion to shock to focused intensity in the span of 3 seconds. One of them, a woman named Garcia, took one look at Emily and started barking orders. "Get me the jump kit. Check her airways. Pupils. Check pupils." "I'm on it," her partner said, already pulling out equipment. Garcia pressed 2 fingers against Emily's neck, waited. Her face was stone, but her hand trembled slightly. "I've got a pulse. Faint. Maybe 30 beats per minute. She's hypothermic. Someone get blankets. We need to warm her slowly." "How is this possible?" Daniel's voice was hoarse. They said she was the autopsy." "There was no autopsy," Mitchell said quietly. Everyone froze. "What?" Sarah whispered. Mitchell's jaw was tight. "Standard protocol for accidental death in a minor. If there's no suspicion of foul play and the cause seems obvious, the medical examiner does an external exam and signs off. They don't always do a full autopsy, especially in a small town, especially when it looks like a straightforward accident." "But she was dead," Sarah said. "She wasn't breathing. She didn't have a pulse. We were there. Severe hypothermia can mimic death," Garcia said, not looking up from Emily. She was wrapping warming blankets around the little girl now, moving with practiced efficiency. Heart rate slows to almost nothing. Breathing becomes nearly undetectable. Body temperature drops so low that standard checks can miss the signs. It's rare, but it happens. "But it's October," Daniel said. "It's 60 degrees outside. How could she—" "Not environmental hypothermia," Garcia said grimly. "Chemical. Someone drugged her. Look." She tilted Emily's arm slightly, revealing a small puncture mark near the inside of her elbow. Fresh, maybe 3 days old. The same day she died. Sarah made a sound like all the air had been punched out of her lungs. Mitchell's radio crackled. Officer Daniel's voice came through, breathless and urgent. "Mitchell, suspect fled into Riverside Woods. Rangers in pursuit. I'm 50 yards behind but losing visual." "Copy that. Stay with the dog. Backup's en route." "Who drugged my daughter?" Sarah's voice rose to a shriek. "Who did this?" Mitchell looked at her, and in that moment, standing in the middle of a funeral that had just become a crime scene, with a little girl who'd been about to be buried alive now fighting for her life on a gurney, he asked the question that would unravel everything. "Mrs. Carter, do you know anyone who would want to hurt your family?" Sarah's face went white, and that's when Mitchell knew. She did know someone. His name was Thomas Granger, and Sarah hadn't spoken it out loud in 4 years. She was sitting in a small room at Maple Ridge Community Hospital now, 2 hours after the funeral, wrapped in one of Daniel's jackets because she couldn't stop shaking. Daniel sat beside her, holding her hand so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Mitchell and another detective, a woman named Torres, sat across from them. Emily was 3 floors up in the ICU, stable, sedated, alive. The doctors said she'd survive. Brain function looked normal, no permanent damage. She'd been minutes from being buried, and if they'd waited even an hour more, but they hadn't, because of Ranger. "Thomas Granger," Sarah said again, her voice hollow. "My ex-boyfriend, before Daniel, before everything." "Tell us about him," Torres said gently. Sarah took a shaky breath. "We dated for 2 years. I was 23, he was 27. At first he was charming, attentive. But then he started getting possessive, jealous. He'd show up at my work unannounced, go through my phone, accuse me of cheating when I wasn't. It escalated." "Escalated how?" "He hit me." Sarah's voice was flat now, reciting facts to distance herself from the memory. "Multiple times. I left him. Got a restraining order. He violated it twice. Once he broke into my apartment. Once he followed me to my parents' house. The second time, the police arrested him. He was charged with stalking, assault, breaking, and entering. He went to prison for 4 years. Mitchell felt his stomach drop. "When was he released?" 6 weeks ago." Sarah's eyes were distant. "I got a notification from Victim Services. They told me he was out on parole. I thought about telling Daniel, but I didn't want to worry him. Thomas was supposed to stay at least 100 miles away. He wasn't allowed to contact me. I thought he'd moved on. It had been 4 years. He'd have a parole officer, restrictions. I thought we were safe." "Did you ever tell Emily about him?" "No. She never knew. Why would I burden a child with that?" "Has he ever tried to contact you since his release?" Sarah hesitated. I got a letter 3 weeks ago. No return address. Just one line. 'You took everything from me. Now you'll know how it feels.' I threw it away. I told myself it might not even be from him. It could have been a prank or—" "You should have reported it," Torres said, but her tone wasn't accusatory, just sad. "I know." Sarah's voice cracked. "God, I know. But I wanted to believe it was over. I wanted Emily to be safe. And I thought if I'd just ignored it—" She broke down then, and Daniel pulled her against his chest, and nobody said anything for a long moment. Mitchell's radio crackled again. "Mitchell, it's Daniels. We've got him cornered near the old mill. Ranger tracked him straight here. Dog's a damn hero. Suspects refusing to come out. We need you here." Mitchell stood. "Mrs. Carter, we're going to need you to stay here with Detective Torres. She'll keep you updated, but I need to go help bring him in." Sarah looked up at him with red, swollen eyes. "Is Emily safe now?" Mitchell wanted to say yes. He wanted to promise her that the nightmare was over. But Thomas Granger was still out there, cornered and desperate, and Mitchell had learned a long time ago not to make promises he couldn't keep. "She's guarded," he said instead. 2 officers outside her room. Nobody gets in without clearance. I'll make sure of it." He left before she could ask anything else. Pause. Before you keep watching, ask yourself, would you have trusted the dog? Most people wouldn't. That's what makes this insane. Because the truth was simpler and darker than any of them wanted to admit. Thomas Granger had sedated Emily, staged her death, and planned to watch her be buried alive. Not to kill her quickly. To make Sarah suffer. To destroy her completely. And if he was cornered now, desperate, with nothing left to lose, Mitchell didn't know what he might do next. Riverside Woods was a tangle of maple and oak trees, thick underbrush, and a creek that wound through the property like a snake. The old mill, abandoned since the 80s, sat on the far edge, its roof half collapsed, its walls covered in graffiti and ivy. Mitchell arrived to find 6 officers surrounding the building, weapons drawn, and Ranger pacing near the entrance, his body coiled like a spring. Officer Daniels jogged over, his face flushed from running. "He's inside. Ground floor northeast corner. Ranger cornered him there and he kicked at the dog. Ranger backed off but won't leave. I think he knows we're waiting." "Has he said anything?" "Not a word, but he's armed. I saw a knife." Mitchell's jaw tightened. "Anyone try to make contact?" "Waiting for you." Mitchell nodded and approached the mill slowly, keeping his hand on his weapon. Ranger fell into step beside him, silent now, but alert. The dog's nose kept twitching toward the mill entrance, and every few seconds he'd let out a low, rumbling growl. "Thomas Granger," Mitchell called out. "This is Officer Mitchell with Maple Ridge PD. We know you're in there. Come out with your hands visible and nobody gets hurt." Silence. Then, "She was supposed to be buried." The voice came from inside, hoarse and shaking. Not with fear, with rage. She was supposed to stay down there, in the dark, in the cold, and Sarah was supposed to feel it. Every second, every breath, knowing her daughter was gone because of her. Mitchell felt a chill run down his spine. "Thomas, Emily's alive. She's in the hospital. You didn't succeed. So come out now and we can—" "Alive?" The word came out as a roar, and there was a loud crash from inside, something being thrown against a wall. "No. No. That's not— She should be dead by now. She was supposed to run out of air. I calculated the timing. I made sure—" "You miscalculated," Mitchell said, keeping his voice level. "She's alive, and you're going to face charges for attempted murder, kidnapping, and about a dozen other felonies. But if you come out now, peacefully, that's one less charge. Resisting arrest, assaulting an officer. Whatever you're thinking of doing, don't." Another silence. Then, "I gave her everything. 4 years of my life, and she threw it away. Moved on. Got married. Had a kid. Like I never existed. Like I didn't matter." "So you tried to bury her daughter alive," Mitchell said flatly. "That's your version of mattering?" "I wanted her to suffer!" The shout was followed by the sound of footsteps, fast, erratic, and then Thomas Granger burst out of the mill's side entrance, knife in hand, running straight for the tree line. He made it maybe 10 feet. Ranger hit him like a freight train. 85 pounds of German Shepherd slammed into Thomas's back, jaws locking around his forearm, the one holding the knife, and Thomas went down hard, screaming. The knife skittered across the ground. 3 officers converged immediately, weapons trained, shouting commands. "Drop the weapon! Hands behind your back! Do it now!" Thomas thrashed, trying to shake Ranger off, but the dog held firm, his training kicking in perfectly. He wasn't biting to injure, he was biting to control, to stop the threat, to protect. Mitchell reached them in seconds, yanking Thomas's arms behind his back and snapping cuffs into place. "Ranger, out!" The dog released immediately and backed away, but his eyes stayed locked on Thomas, his body tense and ready. Thomas was sobbing now. "She was supposed to die. She was supposed to—" "Shut up," Mitchell said. He hauled Thomas to his feet and shoved him toward 2 waiting officers. "Get him in the car. Read him his rights. I want a full psychiatric eval and a written confession if he's dumb enough to keep talking." As they dragged Thomas away, Mitchell knelt down beside Ranger. The dog was panting, his tongue lolling, but his tail started wagging the moment Mitchell's hand touched his head. "Good boy," Mitchell said quietly. You saved her, Ranger. You saved her life. Ranger licked his face once, then turned his attention back to the patrol car holding Thomas. Still watching. Still protecting. Because that's what heroes do. Thomas Granger didn't ask for a lawyer. That should have been the first red flag, but Mitchell had seen it before. Suspects so convinced of their righteousness, so consumed by their own narrative, they genuinely believed they could talk their way into sympathy. Thomas was one of those. He sat in the interrogation room at Maple Ridge PD, his cuffed hands resting on the metal table, a bandage wrapped around his forearm where Ranger had grabbed him. His face was streaked with dirt and tears, but his eyes were cold. Detective Torres sat across from him, a recording device between them. Mitchell stood in the corner, arms crossed. "Tell us what happened," Torres said. Thomas laughed. It was a bitter, broken sound. "What happened? Sarah destroyed me. That's what happened. Start from the beginning." He leaned back in his chair. "I loved her. Gave her everything. Supported her, protected her, made sure she was safe. And what did she do? Left me. Called the cops. Got me thrown in prison for 4 years. 4 years of my life. Gone. Because she couldn't handle a real relationship." "You broke into her apartment," Torres said. "You assaulted her multiple times." "I was trying to make her understand. You stalked her. She was mine." "She was never yours," Mitchell said quietly from the corner. Thomas's head swiveled toward him, and for a moment his mask slipped. Pure hatred flashed across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by that eerie calm again. "When I got out," Thomas continued, "I thought maybe I could move on, start over. But then I saw her, with him, Daniel, and the kid, playing happy family in their nice house with their nice life, and it was like—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "It was like I never existed. Like those 4 years in prison didn't matter. Like I didn't matter." "So you decided to hurt Emily?" "I decided to make Sarah feel what I felt," Thomas corrected. "Helpless, alone, buried." Torres leaned forward. "Walk us through it. The day Emily died." Thomas's lips curled into something that might have been a smile if it weren't so wrong. "I watched them for 3 weeks, learned their routine. Sarah drops Emily at school, Daniel leaves for work by 8. I knew where they kept the spare key, under a fake rock by the back door. Real original." Mitchell's fists clenched, but he stayed silent. "I waited until they were both gone. Let myself in. Emily was in the kitchen eating cereal before school. She recognized me. Sarah used to have pictures of us together. The kid smiled at me. Actually, smiled. Like I was a friend." Torres's face was stone. "What did you do?" "I told her I was a friend of her mom's, that Sarah had asked me to pick her up for a surprise. Kids are so trusting. She came right over." He paused. "I had the sedative ready. Midazolam. Same stuff they use for minor surgeries. Injected it into her arm. She didn't even fight, just went to sleep." Mitchell felt sick. "Then I staged the fall, knocked over a chair at the top of the stairs, laid her at the bottom. Messed up her hair a little, made sure there were a few bruises, nothing major, just enough to sell the story. Then I locked the back door from the inside, climbed out a window, and disappeared." "You knew she'd be misdiagnosed," Torres said. "I was counting on it. Small-town medical examiner, clear cause of death, grieving parents too destroyed to ask questions. I researched it. Hypothermia mimics death. Slow the heart rate enough, lower the body temp, and boom. She looks dead, but she's not. She's sleeping. And in a coffin underground, she'd run out of air in a few hours. Maybe wake up first, maybe not. Either way, He shrugged. Sarah would never recover. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Mitchell spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "You attended the funeral." Thomas's eyes lit up. "I had to see it. Had to watch Sarah fall apart. It was—" He searched for the word. "Beautiful." She was sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. "Perfect." And then Ranger found her. Thomas's face twisted with rage. "That dog. I didn't account for that dog. He shouldn't have been there. He shouldn't have—" He stopped, took a breath. "Doesn't matter. I still won." "You won?" Torres repeated. "Sarah's going to live with this forever," Thomas said. "Knowing her daughter almost died because of me. Knowing she wasn't safe. That I got that close. Every time Emily falls asleep, Sarah's going to wonder if she'll wake up. Every time someone knocks on the door, she'll panic. I didn't have to kill Emily. I just had to break Sarah." Mitchell stepped forward and Torres shot him a warning look, but he ignored it. He leaned down, putting his face inches from Thomas's. "You didn't break her," Mitchell said. "You failed. Emily's alive. Sarah has her daughter, and you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison knowing that a dog outsmarted you." Thomas's smile faltered. "That's right," Mitchell continued. "Ranger, an animal, saw what you did. Stopped it, chased you down, and now you're done. Not because of some brilliant police work, because a German shepherd loved that little girl more than you ever understood what love actually means." He straightened up. "Enjoy your cell." And with that, he walked out, leaving Thomas Granger alone with his failure. The evidence came in fast once they knew what to look for. The neighbor, Mrs. Kowalski, confirmed she'd heard shouting from the Carter house the morning Emily died. A man's voice, angry and sharp. She'd also seen someone matching Thomas's description leaving through the backyard around 8:30 a.m. Security footage from a gas station 2 blocks away showed Thomas's car in the area that morning. The locked back door became a critical clue. How had an intruder gotten out if all the doors were locked from the inside? The answer? The open window in Emily's bedroom, overlooked during the initial investigation because the fall happened near the stairs. The puncture mark on Emily's arm was tested. Midazolam, exactly as Thomas had confessed. But the most damning piece of evidence was digital. Thomas's laptop, seized from his parole housing, contained search history that painted a horrifying picture. How long can someone survive in a coffin? Drugs that mimic death. Midazolam dosage for children. Hypothermia symptoms versus death. How long before someone is declared dead? Can you be buried alive by accident? He'd been planning this for weeks. And buried in his emails was a draft message to Sarah, dated the day before the funeral, never sent. By the time you read this, Emily will be underground. You'll never get her back. You'll spend the rest of your life knowing I won, that you couldn't protect her, that you failed, just like you failed me. Mitchell read it twice, then closed the laptop and walked out of the evidence room before he did something he'd regret. Because here's what Thomas Granger never understood. Love isn't about possession. It's not about control or punishment or making someone suffer. Love is a 7-year-old girl throwing her arms around a dog's neck. Love is an officer trusting his K-9 partner even when the situation seems impossible. Love is parents refusing to let go even when everything says they should. And love, real love, saves lives. Thomas had spent 4 years festering in hatred, plotting revenge, convincing himself that destruction was the same as mattering. But in the end, he was just a footnote, a cautionary tale, a failure. Sarah hadn't left the hospital in 36 hours. She sat beside Emily's bed in the ICU, holding her daughter's small hand, watching the monitors beep and flash, counting every breath like a prayer. Daniel brought her coffee she didn't drink and food she didn't eat. Nurses came and went, adjusting IV lines, checking vitals, speaking in soft, reassuring tones. But Emily hadn't woken up yet. The doctor said it was normal. Her body was recovering from severe hypothermia and sedation. They'd warmed her carefully, treated her for dehydration, monitored her brain activity. Everything looked good. She was stable. But she wasn't awake. And Sarah couldn't shake the image of that tiny coffin, of how close they'd come, of the suffocating weight of not knowing if Emily would ever open her eyes again. "She's going to be okay," Daniel said for the 100th time, but his voice wavered. "You don't know that." "I do. The doctors said." "Doctors can be wrong." Sarah's voice cracked. "They said she was dead, Daniel. They were going to bury her. If Ranger hadn't—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Daniel pulled her into his arms, and they stayed like that for a long time, two people trying to hold each other together while the world kept spinning around them. A soft knock at the door made them both look up. Officer Mitchell stood in the doorway, Ranger at his side. "Is this a good time?" Mitchell asked quietly. Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes. "Please, come in." Mitchell entered, and Ranger immediately moved to the bedside, his tail wagging gently. He sniffed Emily's hand, then sat down, his eyes fixed on her face. "How is she?" Mitchell asked. "Stable," Daniel said. "They think she'll wake up soon. Maybe today. Maybe tomorrow." "Thomas?" "In custody. Full confession. He'll be charged with attempted murder, kidnapping, assault, stalking, violation of parole. The DA says he's looking at 40 years minimum. He won't see daylight again." Sarah closed her eyes. "Good." Mitchell hesitated. "Mrs. Carter, I need to ask. Are you going to be okay?" She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time since the funeral she felt something shift in her chest. Not relief. Not yet. But maybe, the faintest hint of hope. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But we're alive. Emily's alive. That has to be enough for now." Mitchell nodded. "If you need anything, counseling resources, security advice, just someone to talk to, we're here. The whole department is." "Thank you." Sarah reached down and touched Ranger's head. "And thank you, boy. You saved her." Ranger's tail wagged harder, and he licked her hand once, gentle and warm. They sat like that for a while, two parents, an officer, and a dog, waiting for a miracle to wake up. And then, a small, sleepy voice from the bed. "Mom?" Sarah's head snapped around so fast she almost knocked over her chair. "Emily? Emily?" Emily's eyes were open, barely, but open, and she was looking around the room with confused, drowsy awareness. Why am I—" Sarah burst into tears, grabbing Emily's face, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her hands. "Oh, God, baby, you're okay. You're okay. Mom, you're crying." "I know, sweetie. I know. I'm just—" She couldn't speak anymore, just held on, and Daniel was there too, his arms around both of them, and all three of them were crying and laughing and holding on like they'd never let go. And Ranger, because he was a very good boy, started barking, loud, joyful, excited barks. And Emily looked over and her whole face lit up. "Ranger!" The dog jumped up on the bed, technically against hospital rules, but nobody said anything, and Emily threw her arms around his neck, and Ranger licked her face and wagged his tail so hard his whole body wiggled, and Mitchell had to look away because his eyes were suddenly burning. "Okay," he managed. "I'll give you some privacy." But before he left, Sarah caught his hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing him, for trusting him." Mitchell squeezed her hand once. He's a good dog, the best I've ever worked with. He's a hero. Yeah, Mitchell said softly. He really is. And with that, he left, closing the door behind him, leaving the Carter family to their reunion. But he could still hear Emily's voice, bright and clear and alive, drifting into the hallway. "Ranger, did you miss me? I missed you too." And Mitchell smiled. Emily came home 2 days later. The doctors cleared her with strict instructions: rest, hydration, follow-up appointments, and counseling. Lots of counseling. Because even though Emily didn't remember much, the sedative had wiped her short-term memory, she'd eventually need to process what had happened. But for now, she was just happy to be home. The house had been professionally cleaned, every trace of the crime scene removed. Sarah couldn't bring herself to use the word, but that's what it had been. The place where her daughter had been taken from her. But it was still their home, and they'd reclaim it together. The community rallied in ways that surprised even longtime Maple Ridge residents. Meals appeared on their doorstep daily. Cards and flowers filled the entryway. The school organized a welcome-back assembly for when Emily was ready to return. And Officer Mitchell stopped by twice a week, always with Ranger, always checking in. Sarah started therapy the following week. Daniel joined her. They talked about trauma and trust, and how to rebuild a sense of safety when your worst nightmare had almost come true. They talked about Thomas, about Sarah's guilt for not reporting the letter, about Daniel's anger that she'd carried that burden alone, about how they'd move forward as a family. It wasn't easy. Some nights, Sarah would wake up in a panic, convinced Emily wasn't breathing. She'd creep into her daughter's room and stand there, watching her chest rise and fall until her own heartbeat slowed. Daniel installed new locks, a security system, cameras. Emily started having nightmares, vague, shapeless things she couldn't articulate. She'd wake up crying, and Sarah would hold her until she fell back asleep. But slowly, they healed. And through it all, Ranger was there. Mitchell started bringing him by for informal visits, which really just meant letting Emily play with the dog for an hour while the adults talked. Ranger seemed to understand that Emily needed him, because he was always gentle with her, always patient, always present. One afternoon, 3 weeks after the funeral that wasn't, Sarah found Emily sitting in the backyard with Ranger, her arms around his neck, whispering something into his fur. Sarah stepped closer, quiet, and heard, "Thank you for saving me. Mommy says you're a hero." "I think so too." Ranger's tail thumped against the grass. "Do you think you'll visit me again?" Another thump. "Good, because you're my best friend." Sarah covered her mouth to stifle a sob, and when Mitchell appeared beside her a moment later, she turned to him with tears streaming down her face. "How can I ever repay him?" she whispered. "How can I ever—" "You don't," Mitchell said gently. "That's not how it works. Ranger did his job, and his job is to protect people, especially people he loves." "He loves her?" Mitchell smiled. "Can't you tell?" Sarah looked back at Emily and Ranger, curled up together in the grass, and felt something in her chest finally loosen. Not forgiveness, not yet, but gratitude, and love, and the fierce, unshakable determination to never let anything threaten her family again. The trial was swift. Thomas Granger pled guilty to all charges: attempted murder, kidnapping, stalking, assault, violating a restraining order, and half a dozen other felonies. His lawyer advised him that fighting it would only make things worse. The evidence was overwhelming. The confession was recorded, and the jury pool in Maple Ridge was less than sympathetic. The sentencing hearing took place on a gray November morning. Sarah attended, flanked by Daniel and her parents. Emily stayed home with a babysitter. She didn't need to see this. Didn't need Thomas's face burned into her memory. The courtroom was packed. Media had descended on Maple Ridge after the story broke nationally. Dog saves girl from being buried alive. It had everything. Heroes, villains, impossible odds, and a happy ending. Every news outlet from CNN to local radio wanted a piece of it. Mitchell and Ranger sat in the front row, the dog wearing his official K9 vest. He'd been granted special permission to attend as a material witness, though really, it was because the judge wanted him there, because Ranger's presence reminded everyone what was at stake. Thomas was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed, his face hollow. He looked older than his 31 years. Broken. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Margaret Holloway, reviewed the charges without preamble. Then she looked directly at Thomas. "Mr. Granger, you have pled guilty to attempting to murder a 7-year-old child by sedating her, staging her death, and ensuring she would be buried alive. You did this to punish her mother for leaving you. Do you have anything to say before I impose sentencing?" Thomas stood slowly. His lawyer touched his arm, but Thomas shook him off. For a long moment, he just stared at Sarah across the courtroom. Then he spoke. "I spent 4 years in prison thinking about you every single day, hating you, blaming you, convincing myself that you'd ruined my life. And when I got out, I wanted you to hurt the way I'd hurt." He paused. "But standing here now, I realize I was already buried, long before I tried to bury Emily." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. "I was buried in my own anger," Thomas continued, "my own hate. And I convinced myself that making you suffer would somehow set me free. But all it did was bury me deeper." He looked at the judge. "I'm not asking for mercy. I don't deserve it. I'm just saying I'm sorry. For whatever that's worth." The courtroom was silent. Judge Holloway's expression didn't change. "Mr. Granger, your apology is noted, but it changes nothing. You are a danger to society. You targeted a child, an innocent child, to satisfy your own twisted desire for revenge. There is no rehabilitation for someone who could commit such an act." She straightened the papers in front of her. "I hereby sentence you to 45 years in state prison without the possibility of parole. You will also be required to pay restitution to the Carter family for medical expenses and emotional trauma, though I suspect no amount of money can repair what you've done." She slammed the gavel. "Court is adjourned." And just like that, it was over. Thomas was led away, and Sarah felt Daniel's hand grip hers, anchoring her. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel vindicated. She just felt tired. But also, finally, safe. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them, shouting questions, but Mitchell and 2 other officers formed a barrier, guiding the Carters to their car. Ranger walked beside Emily's parents, his presence a comfort and a shield. Before they left, Sarah turned to Mitchell one last time. "I don't know what happens now," she said quietly. "How we move forward from this." Mitchell nodded. "One day at a time, one breath at a time, and you lean on the people who love you." "Will you—" she hesitated. "Will you and Ranger keep visiting? Emily asks about him every day." Mitchell smiled. "We'd be honored." Sarah hugged him, quick and fierce, and then she and Daniel drove away, disappearing into the autumn afternoon. Mitchell watched them go, then looked down at Ranger. "You did good, boy," he said softly. "You saved her." Ranger wagged his tail once. And in that moment, Mitchell understood something profound. Sometimes the world is dark. Sometimes evil tries to win. Sometimes people do terrible, unthinkable things. But sometimes, a dog loves a little girl enough to refuse to let her go. And that makes all the difference. 3 months later, Maple Ridge held a ceremony. It was a cold February afternoon, but the sun was bright, and the town square was packed with people. Families with children, elderly couples, Teenagers, reporters, everyone wanted to be there, to witness history. Because today, Ranger was being honored. The mayor stood at a podium, flanked by Mitchell, the police chief, and several city council members. But the star of the show sat calmly at Mitchell's feet, his tail occasionally wagging, his eyes scanning the crowd with the quiet confidence of a dog who knew exactly how important he was. "Ladies and gentlemen," the mayor began, "we are gathered here today to recognize an act of extraordinary heroism, an act that saved a life, exposed a terrible crime, and reminded us all what true courage looks like." The crowd applauded. Officer Mitchell and his canine partner, Ranger, have served our community with distinction for 6 years. They've found missing hikers, tracked dangerous suspects, and kept our streets safe. But on October 14th of last year, Ranger did something that defied all expectation. Something that we can only describe as miraculous. The mayor gestured to a large screen behind him, where photos of Emily and Ranger appeared. Emily hugging the dog at a community fair, Emily asleep in a hospital bed with Ranger beside her, Emily and Ranger playing in the Carter's backyard. When everyone believed Emily Carter had died, Ranger refused to accept it. He detected what no human could: the faint signs of life in a child who'd been sedated and left to die. His actions stopped a burial, triggered an investigation, and ultimately led to the capture of the man responsible. Sarah and Daniel stood near the front row, Emily between them. She wore her favorite yellow dress, the same one she'd been wearing in the coffin, though Sarah had bought her a new one. Emily couldn't stop smiling, her eyes locked on Ranger. "And so," the mayor continued, "it is my profound honor to present Ranger with the key to the city, the Police Commendation Medal for Valor, and the title of Honorary Citizen of Maple Ridge." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Mitchell led Ranger up to the podium, where the mayor placed a special collar around the dog's neck, one with a gold medal attached. Ranger sat perfectly still, accepting the honor with the same stoic grace he brought to everything. Then the mayor stepped aside, and Mitchell leaned down to the microphone. "I've been a K-9 officer for 12 years, Mitchell said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've worked with 5 different dogs in that time, and every one of them has been incredible. But Ranger," he paused, stroking the dog's head, "Ranger is special. Not because of his training or his skills, though he has both in spades, but because he cares. He doesn't just do his job, he protects people because he loves them. And on that day in October, his love for a little girl saved her life." The crowd was silent now, hanging on every word. "A lot of people have asked me how Ranger knew, how he could sense something no human detected. And the truth is, I don't know. Maybe it was his training. Maybe it was instinct. Or maybe," Mitchell smiled, "maybe it was just love. Because love doesn't give up. Love doesn't accept defeat. Love keeps fighting even when everything says there's no hope left." He looked directly at Sarah and Emily. "Emily, Ranger wants you to know something." Mitchell knelt down beside the dog. "He says he'd do it all over again. Every single time. Because you're worth it." Emily burst into tears and ran forward, and the entire crowd held its breath as the 7-year-old threw her arms around Ranger's neck. The dog stayed perfectly still, his tail wagging gently, his eyes soft and warm. "I love you, Ranger," Emily whispered. "You're my hero." Ranger licked her cheek, and the crowd exploded into applause again, louder this time, people wiping their eyes, parents holding their children closer. Sarah joined Emily, kneeling beside them, and she looked at Mitchell with tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she mouthed. Mitchell nodded. Because some things don't need words. After the ceremony, the Carters hosted a small gathering at their home. Just close friends, a few officers, and of course, Mitchell and Ranger. Emily spent the entire afternoon playing with Ranger in the backyard, throwing a tennis ball that the dog retrieved with endless patience. She laughed, a sound that still made Sarah's heart ache with gratitude. And for the first time in months, Sarah felt like maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay. As the sun began to set, Mitchell found Sarah standing on the porch, watching Emily and Ranger. "She's doing well," he said quietly. Sarah nodded. "Therapy helps. And time. And knowing that Thomas can't hurt us anymore." She paused. "But mostly, it's because of Ranger. She feels safe when he's around. He has that effect on people." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Sarah asked the question she'd been afraid to voice. "What happens when Ranger retires? Will he still visit?" Mitchell smiled. "Ranger's got a few more years of service left. But when he does retire..." He looked at her. "We've been talking about it, actually. The department usually places retired K9s with their handlers, but in special cases where a dog has formed a bond with someone outside the force, we consider other options." Sarah's breath caught. "You mean... I mean, if you wanted to adopt him when the time comes, the department would approve it. He saved your daughter's life. It seems right that he'd spend his retirement with her." Sarah covered her mouth, tears welling up again. "Are you serious?" "Completely. But that's a few years away. For now, we'll keep visiting, as often as Emily wants. She'll want every day. Then we'll make it work." Sarah hugged him, and Mitchell patted her back awkwardly, because he'd never been great with emotional displays, but he understood the weight of what they'd all been through. When Sarah pulled back, she looked him in the eye. "You and Ranger didn't just save Emily's life. You saved all of us. Our family, our future, everything." Mitchell shook his head. "Ranger saved her. I just trusted him." "That's what makes you a hero, too." Mitchell didn't know what to say to that, so he just smiled and called Ranger over. The dog bounded up the porch steps, Emily laughing and chasing after him, and for a moment, everything was perfect. A family healed, a child alive, a dog wagging his tail. Sometimes that's all the ending you need. 4 years later, on a sunny spring morning, Ranger officially retired from the Maple Ridge Police Department. He was 11 years old now, still healthy, still sharp, but his hips were starting to bother him, and Mitchell knew it was time. The department threw him a retirement party with a cake shaped like a bone and a ceremony where the chief thanked him for his 8 years of exemplary service. And the next day, Ranger moved in with the Carters. Emily, now 11 herself, had prepared for weeks. She'd set up a bed in her room, bought toys and treats, even made a welcome home banner. When Mitchell brought Ranger through the front door for the last time, Emily squealed and dropped to her knees, and Ranger trotted over like he'd always belonged there. Because maybe he had. Mitchell stayed for dinner, and as he prepared to leave, Emily walked him to the door. "Thank you," she said solemnly, "for letting us have him." Mitchell crouched down to her level. "Emily, Ranger chose you a long time ago. I'm just making it official. Do you think he'll miss being a police dog?" Mitchell glanced back at Ranger, who was sprawled on the living room floor, surrounded by the Carter family, his tail thumping lazily against the carpet. "No," Mitchell said. "I think he's exactly where he wants to be." Emily hugged him, and Mitchell left, his heart both full and aching, because saying goodbye to a partner was never easy. But as he drove away, he looked in the rearview mirror and saw Emily and Ranger playing in the yard, and he knew, absolutely knew, that this was right. Ranger had saved Emily once. Now it was her turn to give him a home. Years later, when Emily graduated high school, she gave a speech at her commencement. She talked about survival, about second chances, about the people and animals who refuse to give up on you even when everything seems lost. And she ended with this: "I'm alive today because a dog loved me. Not a person, not luck, a dog. And if that doesn't teach you something about the power of love, I don't know what will." The crowd stood and applauded, and in the front row, Ranger, now 15, gray-muzzled and slow-moving but still present, thumped his tail once. Because heroes don't need speeches, they just need to be remembered. And Ranger would never be forgotten. Ranger's story doesn't end here. Click the video on your screen to hear about the second time he saved someone's life. You won't believe it.